Where last we left off, we were talking about this building, Palace of Versailles, and how it became Louis' center of power for the purpose of guaranteeing that he didn't have to share power. By making the nobles live in one spot, not allowing them to go off and make mischief in the country, he was tying them down. Now, what was the name of the system he put in place where nobles were acting almost like servants to him? Levy. Good. So Louis is going to do a lot of things. His legacy is a little mixed. First off, he rules for 72 years. He's one of the longest reigning French monarchs. Under him, French culture was the dominant in Europe. Not just in France and not just in England, but in Europe. If you want to have the best of something, you aim for the French. The academies spread French culture. It spread new art forms like the ballet. And so, under Louis' reign, France became the power in Europe. But it comes at a tremendous cost. First, the wars are very expensive. Indeed, expense was something somewhat synonymous with Louis' reign. He always pushed the debt to later. And so that's going to have a major effect later on. France is going to have tremendous trouble whenever those debts are called in. 2. These wars really didn't actually benefit France all that much. Part of the reason for that is the other nations of Europe were really nervous of the power that the French had to bring to bear. And so in instances where they were afraid that France would be able to amass enough power to actually threaten all of Europe, they tended to side together. A great example of that is the War for Spanish Succession. In the end, Louis spends a fortune on a war that doesn't benefit him whatsoever. And lastly, Louis revokes the Edict of Nantes. What did the Edict of Nantes grant to the people of France? Freedom of what? Religion. Good. So by doing that, he's promoting more religious tension within his own nation. So ultimately, yes, under Louis' reign, it's France's sort of golden age, kind of. In truth, France is not going to be in a good way after his reign, and it's going to end up getting worse because his successors don't really have the ability to put an end to what was going on in France. They weren't able to really solve any of the problems. And so, we find ourselves in a predicament. So that's pretty much it for France. Absolute monarchy number 2. Next, we're going to be looking at some other places around Europe. Now, a couple things before we get on to that next slideshow. 1, you'll notice that the words are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, yes? That doesn't mean you should be writing more. I know the temptation is very strong for you to write literally everything I put on this board, but you should not be doing that. For one thing, it's completely unnecessary. Remember, I'm recording every single lecture. Unless there is some major problem, where like my computer shuts down mid-lecture or something, you're going to have access to all these notes again later. So you really don't need to worry about missing something. Secondly, one of the skills you'll need to develop is the ability to see big blocks of text and pick out the important information. Now, some of the clues you can have from that is, well, what's the instructor saying? Are they hitting points of this harder? Are they explaining things of this? That will help you pick out what's important, but also understanding that a lot of what's in a sentence is utterly irrelevant to making your point. In addition, is not something you would ever need to actually write down. We revoked the Edict of Nantes, 1685. That's really close enough. So this is the type of thing you need to be practicing. Practicing this strategy, practicing this ability. You're getting these notes in your readings, you're getting them from the lecture, and then you have them recorded. There's no need for you to fret over missing one thing that is said, because you can always catch it later. So, with that being said, I'm going to be telling you as we're going through this what matters. So just pay attention to that, try to write that down, and then not really much else. The next section we're going to be looking at is on Austria and Prussia. This would be chapter 5, section 4. And let's start with kind of saying where these places are, because I find a lot of folks are confused by Prussia, because if you look on a modern map, Prussia isn't there. So, where is it? Well, Prussia is a state, if you will, a territory of Germany. It's actually the northeastern part of Germany. There are several different states in Germany, like Bavaria and so on and so forth. So if you hear the word Prussia, think German, okay? Not Russia. Prussia with a P equals Germany. Russia with an R equals the country. Does that make sense? Okay. So we're going to start with a war, the 30 Years' War. From your reading, who was it that fought the 30 Years' War? Who was involved? Yeah. Not the 30 Years' War, that's the 7. Mm-hmm. Okay, sure. Which families? The Habsburgs, good. That's one major one. That's the royal dynasty of the Holy Roman Empire. So who else we got involved? The what? The Hohenzollern? That's it. That's Prussia. They will be involved. Bourbon? Mm-hmm. Yeah, or Bourbon would be another way of pronouncing it. Yeah, France. Good. Anybody else? In truth, it's pretty much all of Europe. If you look at it, it's basically a world war, more or less. It's across Europe. And the thing of it is, it started off as a religious war. It's a war between Protestants in the north and Catholics in the south. It starts with a really insignificant kind of event. You had the Habsburg King of Bohemia suppress the Protestant uprisings going on in his nation, or at least attempting to, and in response, the Protestants take two of the king's messengers and huck him out a window. The act of throwing someone out of a window is called defenstration. You defenestrate a person out that window. And this was known as the Defenestration of Prague because it happened in Prague. So, two of the king's men are thrown out a window. And needless to say, the king is quite upset about this. So he vows he's going to put an end to this rebellion, and he's going to do it with the help of all of his Catholic allies. Now, here's the thing you have to understand. Because he's a Habsburg, he can potentially be king of the Holy Roman Empire. So this is a much larger empire than just Bohemia. And indeed, he is elected and starts bringing in all of his Catholic allies to go beat down the Protestants of Bohemia. Now, here's the problem with that. Remember, we've talked about the concept of the balance of power, trying to maintain a balance between the various European nations. So by seeing this huge alliance go steamroll Protestant, the other Protestant nations are like, what if they decide to come for us next? So they all start siding together, and so you have a religious war between Protestants and Catholics, but things start to go a little silly pretty quick. That's a woodcut of the defenestration of Prague. And again, you'll kind of see that, this was an attempted murder. They actually were fine. I think one of them broke an ankle, and they're otherwise okay from being thrown out a window. It might seem like a weird way to go about it, when you have a knife to stab them, things like that. But it's still a murder attempt. So even though they utterly fail at it and they kind of run off and it's all good, it is a situation where you're challenging the king's authority. So it's more than just, being silly. The silliness comes from the fact that the Catholics start turning against each other, and some start siding with Protestants, and Protestants with Catholics against other Protestants. It devolves pretty quickly into a free-for-all as people start finding excuses to attack their enemies and basically start settling old scores. And so this whole idea of Christian civil war kind of goes out the window. Political alliances shifted dependent on who they needed on their side at any given time, so we're not even going to go into that detail, it'd be too confusing. But understand what the side effects of this is going to be. This is a large-scale war. It's so big that there's actually not enough soldiers to fight it. They run out of warriors, so they have to contract mercenaries to subsidize their forces. So this would be like the U.S. engaging a war in Canada and hiring a bunch of French mercenaries to come over and start fighting against the Canadians. So what's the effect of that? Strap yourselves in, it's going to get bad. You see, the thing is, mercenaries have no loyalty to a nation. They're only loyal to a paycheck. And the Europeans at this time weren't exactly the best at remembering to pay their mercenaries. And so, what the mercenaries would do is effectively pay themselves by looting. Essentially, you march an army into a town, go about the town, and just start stealing anything you can get your hands on. If anyone tries to resist, you kill them on the spot. Entire villages are depopulated. That means everyone is killed in them. Every single person is wiped out. Untold death and destruction by roving bands of mercenaries. So the end effect is going to be a significantly diminished population in Europe, as well as utter destabilization of former large kingdoms. The winner, if there is one, is most likely considered France. They come off the best because they gain the most territory, whereas the Habsburgs lost most of their power. A lot of Germany, for instance, was divided up into 360 different nations. Now think about this for a second. How well do politicians get along with each other in the U.S. Congress? Okay. And how many states do we have? Right. So we're talking more than 6 times that. Are you ever going to accomplish anything as a group? No. And that's going to be incredibly important when we get to the age of Napoleon, because they can't mount a decent defense against his armies. Napoleon's basically going to steamroll Germany. And that's going to be a big problem for the rest of Europe. So Germany ends up the loser. And the thing is, this is so convoluted that one peace treaty can't end the war. They actually need several that are collectively known as the Peace of Westphalia in 1648. So we're talking a war so convoluted, so complicated, they've got to layer treaties on top of each other to try to put an end to the fighting. Territory changes hands, alliances are shifted, and so basically the end result is the nations of Europe are incredibly paranoid at the end of this conflict. They're going to be nervous of another nation gaining enough power to threaten all of them, plus they're nervous of the fact that all these different alliances kept shifting. So you never really know who your friends are when you're engaging in war. So paranoia is going to be on the rise in Europe, and it's going to culminate in the First World War, which, again, isn't till the 1900s. So we're talking about something that is beginning to form more than 200 years out. So history impacts later things all the time. This map shows the changes of territories that are going on at the Peace of Westphalia. And you'll see pretty quickly, it's very convoluted. So needless to say, the important thing, the thing you really have to know, is that's what it looked like at the end. Mostly what we think of as Europe today, with a few major exceptions, such as Germany being a hot mess. That's Germany. That's Germany right there. So it is utterly messed up. So this might beg a question, where does Germany come from then? And the answer is, toward the middle part of the 19th century, there's a big movement of unifying all peoples who have a similar culture. It's called nationalism. The idea is sort of like super patriotism, but the thing is, it can also be really deadly as well. It can be devastating because not only is it trying to bind one group of people together, but it by nature excludes everybody else, usually at putting them towards the bottom of the scale. So it's a pretty racist policy for the most part, and it's not a virtue. It's not to be confused like where patriotism is like, pride and love of your country. That's a virtue. Nationalism is not in any way, shape, or form. And this is going to result in Germany unifying, but it's going to put them at odds with a bunch of other European nations, causing wars between like France and Russia and all these other places, and ultimately is going to result in a bigger war. Not so much Russia, to be perfectly honest, more like a threat of war, to be honest. This is just something I've tended to show when I'm talking about pike and shot formations. You guys already saw that in the video we watched, so I'm not really going to go into detail there, but that's what that was. Okay, so what are the effects for the Habsburgs? Well, despite all these losses, the Habsburg Empire grows. They add Bohemia, Hungary, Poland, Italy, all these different places. Essentially, what you need to know is they grow despite that. The problem with growth, though, is they're adding a bunch of different nationalities. And again, they're not necessarily getting along. So, in order to try to promote peace, what they would do is they would force people to move away from their homes and force them to move in with other groups, integrate. So by separating out these different ethnic groups, they can't build up a power base and rebel against you later. And it actually works pretty well. Now, the first monarch we're going to talk about is Maria Theresa, the daughter of Charles VI, who becomes the Empress of Austria. Now, she's a pretty amazing person for a lot of reasons. One of her most famous things that she did was fight off the armies of Frederick the Great, the King of Prussia. Why that's so significant? He was a genius when it came to military tactics. And, to be frank, she was a woman. Women are not allowed to lead their armies. So she actually had to go to her parliament, who was almost universally antagonistic, and convince them to fight for her. And not only did she succeed, they came out willing to die for her. That's how good of a public speaker she was. She convinced an entire room full of hostile armed noblemen to lay down their lives for Her Majesty. That's pretty hardcore politicking. Furthermore, under her reign, Austria becomes sort of a solidified empire. It had always been, don't get me wrong. But under her reign, it gets a lot more legitimacy. She's also, by the way, a Habsburg. So she's related to the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. So she's got that blood relation. Have you guys ever heard of Marie Antoinette? You know who she was the Queen of where? France. She was the wife of King Henry or Louis the 16th, the one who got his head chopped off during the French Revolution. Right. She was Maria Theresa's daughter. Okay? So think about what that does. Their marriage, this is talking Louis the 16th and Marie Antoinette, was a union of the Habsburgs and the House of Bourbon. So this was a huge, huge thing, right? So that's the kind of thing she's able to arrange. Maria Theresa is a pretty tough cookie in history. Now, despite her fending off Frederick, she still ends up losing territory, specifically the province of Silesia. However, during her reign, the royal bureaucracy is strengthened and the government functions better than ever. So really, her reign, gold star, amazing lady. Now, Prussia is kind of interesting because Prussia is one of these German states that is sort of on its own at the end of the 30 Years' War. And they're actually going to thrive during this. They're very militaristic, very organized, and one of the secrets of their military is by planning ahead of time. How many of you guys know that we have plans on invading Canada? We have plans that tomorrow, if we went to war with Canada, we knew how to invade them, we knew exactly what we wanted to do. We have plans on invading Britain, plans on invading Brazil, anywhere. Anywhere you can think of, we have plans. If we went to war today, what would we do? It's planning for a worst-case scenario, and in some cases, it's just more of a thought experiment than anything. But this is something we do. That is a Prussian thing, and that's important. Because the biggest problem when you go to war is it takes time to mobilize your troops. We have a tremendously powerful army. We can get there really freaking fast anywhere in the world, but it still takes us a long time to get where we want to go. We still got to load everybody up, recall all the troops, get them in one place, make certain they're taken care of, they have all the stuff they need, get them on the ground, get them where they got to go. It's go, 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 go. Some of you guys have this experience every morning when you go to school. It's a bit of a fight, isn't it? It's getting everybody ready and out the door. So by planning ahead of time, knowing exactly what you're doing, you can cut down that time, you can mobilize your forces faster, you're more efficient. Prussia is going to thrive, and ultimately, Prussia is going to be the nation that brings Germany back. But that's going to be later. That's not till the 19th century. They're led by the family, the Hohenzollern family, which is their dynasty, if you will. And basically, after the Peace of Westphalia, they begin taking over a lot of these smaller German nations piecemeal. Eventually, Germany is going to be kind of re-put back together to some extent because of Napoleon. But we'll get to that later. And then this is the last slide, I believe. Frederick William I, who was the Emperor of Prussia, King of Prussia, I think technically was his term, wants to see Prussia become great. And he certainly adds some territory, but the thing is, with military expansion, you have to have the money and the resources to do it. You have to be able to actually go about the process. And so his reign is spent building resources, building a war chest, training the military, getting things ready. And he wants his son to be in a great position to use this military to expand the empire when he becomes the emperor. The problem with this plan, William II isn't really interested in the military. He's not really interested in a lot of the things his father's all about. He's like into like the arts or something. I forget because it's been a while since I've read it, but I think he was like wanting to be a painter or something like that, like something really stereotypical. And his father was what we would probably call today an abusive personality. Then he was just a very stern disciplinarian, but he did some pretty freaking harsh things. I mean, take this in mind. He was so bad that Frederick William II fled his house. He ran away from home to try to get away from his dad to try to live his own life. Well, he didn't get very far before he was captured and brought back before his father to face punishment for running away. Now, the way he had gotten out of the castle was by having a family friend break him out. So Frederick William I sits his son down and looks him in the eyes and says, "You chose to run away. And what you have to understand, my boy, is every decision in this life has a consequence." And with that, he pulls out a knife and slits his best friend's throat. So Frederick William II is forced to watch his friend die for his attempt to escape. He doesn't try to run away again. The thing of it is, he actually is a military genius. He ends up using his military campaigns to greatly increase the size of Prussia, and he is eventually given the title the Great. So what's the effect? Again, we have certain nations falling apart. The Holy Roman Empire is limping along by this point. It's going to hang around for a while yet, but at this point on, it's pretty much reached the apex of its power. Spain is on the decline, France is on the rise, Prussia is on the rise. England is sort of doing its own thing. It will be on the rise as well. Russia we'll get to tomorrow, but as we'll see, Russia is going to be growing tremendously and raising itself up as a power. In the south, a lot of the territories in Southern Europe are broken up between other nations. So ultimately, what we have going on in Europe is a changing of the old guard and new powers rising up and everybody else paranoid of everybody else. Any questions? Okay, tomorrow you guys have Chapter 5, Section 5, I believe. It's on Russia, the reigns of Peter the Great, as well as Catherine the Great. I think she's actually mentioned elsewhere, but I'm going to throw her in tomorrow, just because she kind of belongs there, in my opinion. And then we'll finish the section on the rise of absolutism. Next week, I'm thinking, was when we're going to start the Count of Monte Cristo. So, that's it for today, guys. You're done.